I was somewhat popular in school at the time, and I had around 4 very, very close friends. Rose, Lynn, Noah, and Zach were the main ones. We went on many adventures around that time: camping, road trips, the beach. Noah's family was pretty wealthy, and all of our families were pretty lenient with rules. One day, the summer before 8th grade, we went on a camping trip with Lynn's older sister Margot and Zach's older brother Todd. So there were 7 of us. Lynn, Zach and I were 13, Noah and Rose were 14, and Margot and Todd were both 17. We decided to go camping in a nearby forest, around 20 miles from Noah's house. It was pretty much in the middle of nowhere. Noah's house and his neighborhood were the closest homes, and there were no signals for phones or any electronics. We get to the spot easily, and without problems, and we make camp. The girls in one tent, the boys in another. Maybe it was a bad idea to have 7 teens, ages 13 to 17, with no phone in the woods. But our parents were lenient, like I said, and confident we would be fine since the woods were not known for anything bad or dangerous. So we set up the tents, go swimming in a nearby lake, and come back and make dinner over a fire which was about 20 feet away from the tents, which were 4 feet away from each other, by the way. We have s'mores and do all those stupid camping things before Lynn and Margot announce they are going to sleep. That left Todd, Rose, Zach, Noah and I as we joked around, told scary stories, and just overall had a good time. Then Margot walks up annoyed and tells us that whoever it is messing with the side of tent, to stop it. Keep in mind no one left the group, and tents were far enough away to not bother anyone in the tents. She explains that someone keeps on touching the side of the tent, running something on it, and we dismiss her. Todd states that it probably is a tree branch, and Rose and I decide to go to sleep as well. So we head back to the tent. Lynn is asleep, and we settle in, me closest to the opening, Margot next to Lynn, who is at the opposite side of the tent, and Rose in between Margot and I. I managed to fall asleep easily, within 5 minutes, until I woke up suddenly, for what seemed like no reason. I checked my phone and it was literally the middle of the night, at 2:15. I looked around, my eyes getting used to the darkness, trying to figure out why I woke up. A tapping sound on the tent was what I first noticed. And a soft giggling. It sounded somewhat deep, like a male voice, but I couldn't be sure. After what felt like an hour but was probably a minute or 2, the tapping and giggling stopped. I was convinced it was my imagination, or maybe one of the boys trying to prank us, or even a tree branch, like Todd suggested earlier. Telling myself it was a tree branch and lack of sleep, I fell back asleep until Rose woke me up around dawn. Everyone was awake, and we decided to hike a little. We decided to go in 2 groups, because we planned on spending the night again, and we didn't want anyone messing with our stuff. Even though these woods weren't popular with camping, we didn't want to risk it. Margot, Lynn, Rose and I left to go hiking for a couple hours while the boys opted to stay behind and fish, swim and cook food. We hiked for about 2 hours and we came back to the boys not at the campsite. Annoyed, Margot went down to the lake with Lynn to find them. Rose and I made our way back to the tents, and I'll be honest and say I screamed and almost wet my pants. The tents were slashed. I inspected it closer after regaining composure because I was usually the more collected one of the 2 of us. It seemed made with a small knife, as the cuts were small. Our tents were made of material that was pretty hard to cut into, and it seemed like the person had a pocket knife, I guessed. The boys, Margot and Lynn, came running to our screams, and were obviously startled. We decided to pack up and head home early, because for one, the tents were ripped too much to use again comfortably, and 2, Rose, Lynn and I were very creeped out. Even more so when Todd announced that his tires were slashed. We were all freaking out, obviously. There was no cell service, Todd's tires were slashed, and there was no way any of us wanted to stay any longer. Luckily, Todd reported that Margot's tires looked fine, and Margot stated that she would take Noah and Lynn, drop them off to call 911 and their parents, and come back for us. She drove a car and there wasn't enough room for more than 3 people as the back was filled up with the camping stuff. Zach, Todd, Rose and I were left at the campgrounds, and we decided to begin a hike back towards the main road so Margot wouldn't have to drive so far. Also, Rose and I refused to stay anywhere near the camp area. We began hiking. My phone died. The last time I looked at it, it was 1 in the afternoon. Zach and Rose both had working phones and constantly updated us on how far we had been walking. I began to hear branches snapping from behind us, closer to the trees than we walked, and I got more and more paranoid as time went on. I told Todd, and he seemed to get more wary of our surroundings, constantly looking over his shoulder. We had been walking for about 30 minutes. Margot was probably at Noah's house or almost there when Todd screamed, "Run!" Naturally, I looked behind my shoulder before I began running. 3 hooded figures were running towards us. 2 had knives, and they all looked around 6'3" or taller. Todd was 6'1", but I doubted he could defend all of us against them. Even though it was broad daylight, I couldn't make out any facial features. They all appeared over or around 200 pounds, the shortest one was probably 6'2", but they all wore hoods and had masks on. Like ski masks. It sounds totally fake and I don't care if you don't believe me, but I was very scared that day. We began running, and the 3 guys finally gave up, or decided we weren't worth terrorizing, because we lost them. We made it to the main road where we waited, walking quickly, constantly looking over our shoulders in fear until Margot arrived. We told the police everything, and they searched the woods nearby. They never found any evidence we had been there, or the guys were there, or that anything happened besides pictures of the lake around the area and the shredded tents. I don't know what would have happened if they had caught us. I'm fairly tall. I was around 5'10" during this time, only around 125 pounds. Rose was around 5'1" and 100 pounds, and Zach was barely 5'9" at the time. He probably outweighed me by 10 pounds maximum. I am so thankful that I told Todd about them. And I am so thankful we all got physical activity regularly, were fast enough to outrun them, and that they gave up. So, whoever you guys were, let's never meet. I went camping with 3 of my buddies, John, Bennett, and Kyle. We do this every year, kind of a bro trip to reconnect with each other. We were all fresh out of college and decided to go on our yearly camping trip in August. We are from Oregon and ended up camping in the woods there like we usually do at the same spot. The first day was great. We set up our spot, explored the area, and by the time the sun was setting, we set up a campfire and made dinner. After a few too many beers and some s'mores, we decided to go to sleep. It was a perfect end to a perfect day. Our second day was basically the same thing. Hiking, food, 1 too many beers, but this night ended up being not so perfect. I remember watching a Mr. Nightmare video about some guys camping and they heard laughing and it turned out it was nobody in their group. Yeah, my story is similar. As we finished the rest of the beers, we were wrestling around with each other like guys do. Then John stopped messing around and froze. Everyone was confused, but John claimed he heard something nearby. I told him it was most likely a squirrel, and he said, "No, it was most definitely not." He was scarring me at this point, so I decided to resume the tackling session, and I took him down. We forgot about the whole thing until about 10 minutes later. We were tired from wrestling and joking around, so we decided to put out the fire and head into the tent. Just as our only light source, besides our flashlights, went out, I heard a slight cackle. I assumed it was one of the boys because we were all clearly a bit buzzed, so everything is funny. I wanted to see what was so funny, so I turned the flashlight directly onto Bennett's face. Bennett's face was as white as a ghost. He looked at me and said, "Did you guys hear that?" I said, "The laughing?" And Kyle said, "That wasn't you." We were all shaken and decided to go into the tent. As we got into the tent, I pulled out an axe that I used to cut the wood. It was the only source of protection we had. I was on the very end of the tent with Kyle and John in the middle and Bennett on the other end. We were all silent, but I knew we were all wide awake after hearing the laughing. We weren't exactly at an actual campsite where there were other people around. We just walked into the woods, found an open spot and set up camp there. We were about a mile from our car with barely any cell signal. So I guess you could say we weren't exactly in the safest position if there was a crazy maniac running around. I got tired, so I dozed off. I have no idea how long I was sleeping before I heard laughing again. It's hard to describe other than it sounded menacing. I was frozen. I didn't move. I didn't even try to look over to see if my buddies were awake. The axe was under my pillow. As I mustered up the strength to move to get the axe, I saw what looked like someone's finger pressed up against the tent, just circling around the tent. Someone was defiantly outside, walking around our tent, laughing. When they got to the front part of the tent where the entrance was, they stopped. About 5 seconds went by before the person ferociously shook the tent and screamed, "Boogity boogity!" That's when I knew my buddies were awake as well, because Kyle screamed like a little girl, and after he screamed, whoever was behind the tent laughed again and walked off. We laid there the rest of the night, wide awake and definitely sober. We didn't want to move out of pure fear that whoever was out there was still there. When the sun came up, we packed up everything and walked back to our car. We still go camping every year, but make sure to go to a legit camping site. I now bring a judge with me and not just an axe. Whoever was outside our campsite could have been a deranged homeless person, psychopath, serial killer, meth head, or just an idiot playing a prank on us. But I sure as heck won't camp in a rural place anymore.